I'm Penny, standing in the rented hall, surrounded by the warm glow of lights and the sound of clinking glasses. I'm overwhelmed by the scene before me. The Montgomery family celebration is in full swing, and at the center of the table stands a magnificent three-tiered cake, a masterpiece I created. Evelyn, an 82-year-old woman with a kind heart and a spirit that defies her age, sits at the head of the table. Her silver hair is neatly coiffed, and her eyes are filled with tears of joy. Thomas, her 85-year-old husband, stands beside her, his posture straight and proud. As I place the cake on the table, Thomas clears his throat, and the room falls silent. Last year, he begins, his voice thick with emotion. This young woman didn't just save my wife's birthday, she saved our family. The words echo through the room, and the guests break into thunderous applause. I feel my throat tighten, and my eyes well up with tears. As I look around, I'm transported back in time to when my bakery on Elm Street in the heart of Savannah was on the verge of closing. I grew up in a small family. My father was a hard, working carpenter, strict but fair, always emphasizing the value of hard work and dedication. My mother was a gentle soul, a homemaker who loved to bake. She passed on her love for baking to me, and I've always dreamed of having my own bakery. 2 years ago, I finally realized my dream and opened my bakery. I was full of hope, imagining that locals and tourists would flock to my delicious red velvets, lemon bars, and pecan pies. But reality was far from my dreams. The bakery was often silent, with only the occasional beep of the cash register marking a meager sale. The landlord's letters became more and more impatient. The last one was a blunt demand for rent, leaving me with a heavy weight on my chest. The bank's emails were even worse, with bolded reminders and phrases like "final notice" that made me dread opening my inbox. Suppliers, who were initially kind, started to lose patience as well. I remember one particular night. The bakery was empty, and the refrigeration unit hummed steadily in the background. There were only a few lonely leftovers in the glass cases, a pair of eclairs and a small tart, mocking me and reminding me of how far my dream had fallen. I was wiping down the shelves with a vinegar-based cleaner, each stroke of the cloth feeling heavier than the last. I glanced up at the chalkboard menu, where the once whimsical handwriting now looked faint and smudged, just like my fading dream. I thought about the early days when the scent of freshly baked cinnamon rolls wafted through the street, and a few curious passers-by would come in, charmed by the chalkboard signs and my nervous smile. But as time went on, the bakery became a burden rather than a joy. Just as I was about to give up and call it a night, the bell over the door jingled. I was startled, as customers at this hour were extremely rare. I turned quickly, expecting a lost tourist or a drunk wanderer, but instead, I saw an elderly man standing in the doorway. His name was Mr. Thompson. He was a retired schoolteacher, a kind-hearted man who had dedicated his life to educating young minds. He was wearing a tweed overcoat that looked like it belonged to a bygone era, and his face was lined with worry. His pale blue eyes held a desperate look as he asked, "Are you still open?" Technically, I wasn't. I hadn't been open for hours. But there was something about the way he clung to the door frame, as if his whole world depended on it, that made me unable to turn him away. "I'm sorry," I said gently. "We're just about closed." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He took out a handkerchief from his pocket and held it like a precious talisman. "Tomorrow is my wife's 82nd birthday," he said, his voice trembling. "We've been married for 60 years, and I forgot to order her cake." I could feel the weight of his words filling the empty shop. He stood there, not as a customer, but as a husband consumed by guilt. For the first time in a long while, I felt my heart quicken, not because of rent or overdue bills, but because of the quiet desperation of this stranger asking for one last chance. He went on to tell me that his wife, Mrs. Thompson, had been in and out of the hospital all year due to heart problems. He had been so focused on taking care of her that he had forgotten this important detail. He showed me a crumpled piece of paper with his shaky handwriting, requesting a simple red velvet cake with cream cheese frosting and a single sugar rose in the center. I was torn. I thought about my pantry shelves, where I had rationed my ingredients, saving them for a possible last-ditch effort. I had already promised myself that if nothing changed by Monday, I would close the bakery for good. But there was something about his plea that tugged at my heartstrings. Mr. Thompson must have sensed my hesitation. He fumbled for his wallet and said, "Please, I'll pay whatever you ask. Just name the price." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said softly, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "If I make this cake, you'll pay me tomorrow, when you see it, if it's what you hoped for." His eyes widened and disbelief turned into relief. He let out a short, breathless laugh and promised to be back at 9:55 the next morning. After he left, the silence in the bakery felt different. It was no longer empty, but filled with expectation. I pulled the string of my apron tighter and walked into the kitchen. I brought down a worn notebook from the top shelf above the mixer. The notebook was filled with my mother's recipes, written in her beautiful looping script. Her notes in the margins, like "Don't rush the frosting" and "Patience is flavor," always reminded me of her love for baking. I found the red velvet recipe and turned on the oven. The first hum of heat filled the kitchen, and I laid out my remaining ingredients: the cocoa powder, the butter wrapped in wax paper, and the 2 vanilla beans I had saved for something special. This, I realized, was exactly what my mother would have called a special occasion. I began to bake, lost in the rhythm of whisking, sifting, folding, and stirring. The scent of cocoa filled the air, and I was transported back to my childhood, when I would watch my mother bake in our small kitchen. She would always say, "A cake should whisper, not shout. If it whispers, people will lean in to listen." As I worked through the night, I felt a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in a long time. This wasn't about ledgers or overdue bills. It was about giving someone a reason to smile. By dawn, the cake was ready. It was a red velvet cake layered with cream cheese frosting, crowned with a delicate sugar rose that seemed to whisper of love and devotion. At 9:45 the next morning, Mr. Thompson arrived. When he saw the cake, his eyes filled with tears. He reached across the counter and grasped my hand, saying, "You don't know what this means." "Thank you." Later that day, I learned that the Thompsons' family party had been a huge success. Their granddaughter, Lily, a 30-year-old food critic with a sharp eye and a passion for good food, was deeply moved by the cake. She wrote an article about it, titled "One Forgetful Grandfather and the Most Honest Cake in Savannah." The article spread like wildfire across Savannah's online community. Overnight, my bakery was flooded with orders. People were not just asking for pastries, they were asking for wedding cakes, anniversary cakes, and corporate orders. I was overwhelmed, but also filled with hope. One evening, after a long and busy day, as I was about to close the shop, a woman walked in. She was tall, with dark hair pulled neatly back and a long coat draped over her shoulders. Her eyes were sharp but softened by a kind smile. It was Lily. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "We're closed for the night." "That's all right," she replied. "I didn't come for pastries." She introduced herself and sat down with me at a small table by the window. She told me that I was talented, not just skilled. The cake I made for her grandparents wasn't about technique. It was about heart. She said that people could taste the love in it, which was why the story spread. She also suggested a partnership. She would invest in the bakery, handle the logistics, marketing, orders, scheduling, supplies, and staff. All she asked was that I keep baking with the same honesty and love. I was stunned by her offer. I had always been terrible at running a business, and the thought of having someone to help me was both exciting and terrifying. But when I thought about my mother's recipes and the dream I had always held, I knew I couldn't let this opportunity pass. So I agreed. And over the next year, the bakery on Elm Street transformed. It was no longer a tired and empty shop. The name Sweet Moments now glowed in polished lettering above the doorway. Each morning, a line would form outside, with locals, tourists, families, and couples waiting patiently to taste our cakes. I no longer worked alone. I had a team of young apprentices who were eager to learn and passionate about baking. I would move among them, correcting their techniques, tasting their creations, and reminding them that every cake might be someone's most important memory. This spring, the Thompson family ordered another cake for Mrs. Thompson's 82nd birthday. This time, it was not a desperate rescue but a cherished tradition. As I stand here in the rented hall, watching the joy on the Thompsons' faces, I know that a single cake made with love can truly change lives. As the celebration continues, I look around at the happy faces and the beautiful cake. I think about the journey that brought me here, from the brink of failure to this moment of success. I know that dreams don't die, they just wait for the right moment to be reborn. And as the bell above the door of my bakery rings, it no longer sounds like a warning but like a promise of new beginnings.